The night of my grandmother's 80th birthday, I was asked to move my chair. Not subtly, not quietly. My aunt walked up behind me, put both hands on the back of my seat and said, "Honey, we need you over there. We're trying to get a family shot here." She pointed to a folding chair near the buffet table, slightly behind a potted ficus. I picked up my glass and moved without saying a word, because I had been doing exactly that my entire life. I watched from beside the ficus as my family arranged themselves in front of the venue's fireplace, my mother in the center, my brother on her left, my cousin on her right, my aunt and uncle flanking everyone like bookends. The photographer counted to 3. Everyone smiled. No one looked toward the buffet table. I took a sip of my water and thought, they have no idea what I've been doing for the past 4 years. I should back up. My name is June. I'm 31 years old. I work in commercial real estate finance. Or at least that's how I'd describe it if someone at a dinner party asked. What I actually do is structure deals. I analyze properties, underwrite loans, build financial models that determine whether a building worth $40 or $60 or $100 million is a viable investment. I have been doing this since I was 26, starting at a firm in Chicago right out of graduate school, working 70-hour weeks for 2 years until I understood the business well enough to start making my own moves on the side. My family thinks I work in banking or something. I have a brother named Cole. He's 34. Cole is, by every metric my family has ever used, the success story. He went to a school with a name people recognize at cocktail parties. He got a job at a consulting firm. He drives a car that my father once described, unprompted, as the car a man drives when he's arrived. Cole is loud and charming, and he fills up every room he walks into, and my parents have spent the better part of 3 decades making sure he had everything he needed to keep doing exactly that. Private tutors in high school. A full ride from my parents for undergrad. Not loans, not a partial contribution, but every dollar of 4 years at a school that costs $60,000 a year. A graduation gift of $25,000 to get started, a trip to Europe with his friends, paid for the summer after he graduated, an introduction to my father's colleague that led directly to his first job. I got good grades in a public school and a state university. I took out loans. I worked part-time through college and full-time through 2 summers. When I graduated, my parents gave me a card with $100 inside and told me they were proud of me. I don't say this to sound bitter. I say it because it matters for understanding what came later. The thing about being the invisible child in a family is that you learn to work without an audience. Nobody is watching you, which means nobody is tracking your progress, which means you either crumble or you build something real in the quiet. I chose the second one. I spent my first 2 years in Chicago learning everything I could. I was the first person in the office and usually the last to leave. I read every deal memo I could get my hands on. I asked questions that my colleagues thought were annoying and my managers eventually thought were impressive. I saved aggressively, living in a small apartment with a roommate, cooking most of my meals, not buying things I didn't need. I opened a brokerage account. I maxed out my 401k every year. I started learning about multifamily real estate investing on my own time. By the time I was 28, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small duplex in a Midwestern city where prices were still reasonable. I bought it, rented both units, and used the cash flow to pay down the mortgage faster than required. 18 months later, I refinanced, pulled out equity, and used it to do the same thing again, twice. Then I partnered with a colleague on a small mixed-use building. Then another. None of this happened overnight. None of it was dramatic. It was just work, repeated quietly, while my family had dinner parties and talked about Cole's latest promotion. I'm not going to pretend I didn't feel anything during those years. There were holidays that were hard. There was a Thanksgiving, when Cole announced he'd been made a senior associate and my mother actually teared up at the table, and I sat there thinking about the deal I'd just closed that week, my best one yet, and said nothing. Because I had learned that my news didn't land the same way in that room. There was a Christmas when my father spent 45 minutes explaining to a family friend why Cole was the one who really has the head for business, while I was sitting 6 feet away. Having spent the last 6 months building a financial model for a commercial acquisition that my firm's senior partners had called one of the tightest they'd seen, I stopped expecting to be seen. That was the shift. Once I stopped expecting it, I stopped being hurt by the absence of it, and I could just focus. The weekend of my grandmother's 80th birthday party was held at a small event venue about 2 hours from where I grew up. A rented ballroom, a catered dinner, a slideshow of old photographs. The whole family was there. My parents, Cole and his girlfriend, 3 aunts and their husbands, a cluster of cousins, and my grandmother herself, who is sharp and funny and has always been the one person in my family who asked me questions about my actual life rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. I arrived Friday evening. The party was Saturday night. On Saturday afternoon, while my mother and my aunts were doing last-minute decorating at the venue, I took a walk around the block. I'd been in this town once before, briefly, for a work-related reason I hadn't mentioned to anyone. The building on the corner of 5th and Aldrin, a 6-story mixed-use property with retail on the ground floor and apartments above it. I had toured it 14 months ago when it came up as a potential acquisition for the fund I'd recently invested in as a limited partner. The fund bought it. I knew because I had reviewed the deal. I stood on the corner for a minute and looked at it. Then I went back to help set up the centerpieces. The party itself was warm and lovely in all the ways those things can be when you're not the person at the center of them. My grandmother was happy. The food was good. Cole gave a toast that made everyone laugh. My mother cried twice. I sat at the end of the second table and talked to my cousin's husband about his vegetable garden, which was genuinely the most relaxed conversation I'd had all weekend. And then my aunt asked me to move my chair. After the photographs, dinner was served. I was back at my spot at the end of the second table when my uncle, my mother's brother, a man named Doug, who has always treated me with a particular kind of benign indifference, the way you treat a piece of furniture you've grown accustomed to, leaned across the table and said, loudly enough for several people to hear, "So June, you still doing that finance stuff?" "Yes," I said. "Cole was telling us he's up for a director position," Doug said. "He hadn't actually asked me anything about my work. He just used it as a runway to talk about Cole." "That's great," I said. My mother, from across the table. "We're so proud of him. He's worked so hard." Cole smiled. His girlfriend put her hand on his arm. My grandmother, sitting at the head of the table, looked at me. Just looked. Not with pity, not with an agenda. Just the way she sometimes does, like she's reading something the rest of the room isn't. "June," she said, "tell me what you've been working on lately." "Grandma, you don't want to hear about commercial real estate finance at your birthday party?" I said. "I'm 80 years old," she said. "I want to hear whatever I want to hear." I smiled. "I've been working on a fund investment, actually. Mixed-use properties. It's going well." "Mixed use?" she repeated. She nodded slowly, like she was filing it away. Cole said, "Oh yeah? What kind of fund?" His tone was light, conversational, the way you ask a child what they want to be when they grow up. "Equity fund," I said. "Commercial real estate. We focus on secondary markets." "We," he said. "I'm a limited partner," I said. "And I have a few direct holdings of my own?" The table didn't go silent or anything. It was too noisy for that. But I watched my mother's expression do something I'd never quite seen it do before. A small recalibration, like a scale that had just registered unexpected weight. Doug said, "What kind of direct holdings?" "Residential and mixed use," I said. "I started with a duplex a few years ago, rolled equity forward. I have a few properties now." "In Chicago?" my father asked. He had turned toward me. This was notable because my father, for most of the dinner, had been oriented entirely toward Cole's side of the table. "Chicago and 2 other markets," I said. "One of them is actually here in this town." My mother frowned. "What do you mean, here?" "The fund I'm in acquired a property here about 14 months ago," I said. I reviewed the deal before we closed. It's the building on 5th and Aldrin, actually. Cole put down his fork. The corner building, he said. The corner building, he said. The corner building, he said. My grandmother made a small sound that I think was a laugh. My father said slowly, "You own part of a building here." "I own a stake in the fund that owns the building," I said. "It's not the same as owning it outright, but yes, effectively." My aunt, not the one who had moved my chair, the other one, Aunt Patricia from my father's side, who has never once asked me anything about my career, said, "How does that even work? How does that even work? How does a person just do that?" And I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the years of 70-hour weeks and the duplex with the leaky faucet I learned to fix myself to save money, and the Sunday mornings with spreadsheets instead of brunch, and the holiday dinners where I sat at the end of the table and said very little and felt very much. "You save your money," I said, "and you learn what you can, and then you start small and you keep going." Nobody said anything for a moment. Cole said, "That's actually pretty impressive, June." He said it the way you say something when you are recalibrating in real time and you want to land on the right side of the recalibration before it's too late. I didn't hold it against him. Cole is not a bad person. He's just the person our family made him, and that's not entirely his fault. "Thanks," I said. My mother said, "Why didn't you tell us?" This was the question I had thought about the most, actually. Not because I was planning some dramatic reveal. I wasn't. I genuinely had not planned for any of this to come up at my grandmother's birthday party. It came up because my grandmother asked me a real question and I answered it. That was all. But the question of why I hadn't told them, I had an answer for that. And I had decided years ago that if the moment ever came, I would be honest. I tried a few times, I said. When I bought the duplex, I called home and told Mom, and she said that was nice, and then asked if I'd heard that Cole had just gotten a raise. When I made my first fund investment, I mentioned it at Christmas, and Dad said that sounded complicated and changed the subject. I stopped mentioning it because it didn't seem like the kind of room where it mattered. My mother's face did something complicated. My father said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That's not fair, June." "I know," I said. "But it's what happened." My grandmother put her hand over mine on the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The rest of the dinner was quieter than it had been before, not uncomfortably, more like the way a room gets quieter when people start actually listening. My father asked me 2 more questions about how deal structures work. My aunt, who had moved my chair, did not move it back, but she did sit next to me during dessert and ask how I had learned to do what I do, and I told her, and she listened. Cole and I ended up talking on the patio after dinner, just the 2 of us, his girlfriend having gone inside to warm up. He had a glass of wine, and I had a cup of decaf, and we stood there looking out at the parking lot, which was not scenic but was quiet. "I had no idea," he said. I knew you were doing finance stuff. I just didn't think." He stopped. "I guess I didn't think very hard about it." "No," I said, not meanly, just honestly. He turned his glass around in his hands. "Does it bother you that they—" He stopped again. "It used to," I said. "It doesn't anymore, really. I built what I built. That happened whether anyone was watching or not." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, when Dad was helping me prep for my first job interviews, I always assumed he was doing the same for you." "He took you out to lunch every week for a month," I said. I got a card that said, "Go get 'em." Cole exhaled, not dramatically, just a long, slow breath, like something was settling into place for him. "I'm sorry," he said. "You don't need to apologize for what they did," I said. "But thank you." We stayed out there for a while. It got cold. We went inside. On Sunday morning, the family gathered at my grandmother's house for a casual brunch before everyone drove home. I was helping carry plates from the kitchen to the table when my grandmother caught me in the hallway and put her hand on my arm. "You've been carrying this a long time," she said. "I'm okay, Grandma." "I know you are," she said. "That's not what I meant." I mean, you've been carrying it quietly all by yourself, and that took a lot. She paused. I see you. I have always seen you. I had thought I was past the part where things like that could make me cry. I was wrong. I stood in my grandmother's hallway with a stack of plates and I cried, just briefly, and she held my arm and didn't say anything else, which was the right call. We went and had brunch. My father passed me the good coffee without being asked. My mother told my aunt about my properties with a kind of pride I had never heard her direct toward me before. Still slightly miscalibrated, still a little bit performing, but real in its way. I let it be real. On the drive home that evening, I crossed through the downtown of that small town and I stopped at a red light on 5th and Aldrin. The corner building was on my left, 6 stories, brick, the ground floor retail lit up and open. I sat there for a moment while the light was red, just looking at it. A woman walked out of the ground floor coffee shop with a cup in her hand. She looked up at the building for a second, not for any reason, just the way you look at things that are part of your ordinary day, without thinking about them. Then she walked on. The light turned green. I drove home. I still don't post much about my life on social media. My family still doesn't fully understand what I do. My mother still leads with Cole in conversations with strangers. Old habit, deep groove. But something shifted that weekend, and I don't think it unshifted when everyone drove home. My father called me the following Tuesday, which he had not done without it being a holiday or a logistical reason in a very long time. He asked how the fund was performing. I told him. He listened. That was enough. Not everything, but enough. The thing I want to say, if any of this is landing with you the way I hope it is that I never stopped working so that one day I could show them. I stopped expecting them to see me, and then I just worked, because the work itself became the point. The building on 5th and Aldrin is not a revenge story. It's just what happens when you stop waiting for permission to take yourself seriously. I stopped waiting a long time ago. The rest followed. If you've ever felt like the one at the end of the table, next to the ficus, with your glass of water in your quiet ICU, I know what that room feels like from the inside. And I want you to know that the room is not the whole world. There's a lot of space outside of it, and it's yours if you decide to go build something in it. I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about why that weekend hit the way it did, not just for my family, but for me. I had spent years telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need the approval, that the work was enough. And mostly that was true. But sitting at that table, watching my grandmother reach over and put her hand on mine, I realized there's a difference between not needing to be seen and never having been seen. Those are two very different things to carry. What happened to me, and to Cole in a way he's only beginning to understand, was the result of choices that compounded over time. Not dramatic choices, not villainous ones, just small, repeated decisions about who got the lunch and who got the card, who got the question and who got the subject change. Those things don't feel like much in the moment, but they accumulate into a shape, and eventually that shape becomes the architecture of who you believe you are allowed to be. I was lucky, not because things came easily. They didn't. But because somewhere in my early 20s I made a decision about what I was going to do with the architecture I'd been handed. I could keep trying to renovate it from the inside, keep hoping the room would rearrange itself to include me. Or I could go build something outside of it, in the quiet, on my own terms. I chose the second one, and that choice, made and remade every morning for years, is the whole story. There's a version of this where I grew bitter, where the invisibility curdled into resentment and I spent my energy proving people wrong instead of building something right. I understand that version. I was close to it more than once. But resentment is expensive. It costs you your focus, and focus is the only real currency that matters when you're starting with less than the person next to you. What I kept coming back to in those long stretches of working without an audience was this: the quality of your choices doesn't change based on who's watching. The duplex I bought at 28 didn't become a better investment because my father knew about it, The deal I structured that my senior partners called one of the tightest they'd seen wasn't less real because my mother talked over it. The work was what it was, independent of the room. That's the thing I want to say out loud, because I think a lot of people are living in rooms that keep looking away from them. The room does not determine your value. It reflects back what it was built to reflect. And sometimes it was built by people who had their own limitations, their own blind spots, their own reasons for looking in one direction and not another. That's not an excuse for them. It's just a fact that helps you stop waiting. Cole said he was sorry that night on the patio. I meant it when I told him he didn't need to apologize for what our parents did. But I also think that apology was the beginning of something for him, the beginning of seeing clearly, and clarity, even when it comes late, is worth something. My grandmother saw me. She always had, and when she held my arm in that hallway and said so out loud, it didn't fix the years. But it confirmed something I had already quietly decided was true. I was worth seeing. I just hadn't waited for permission to act like it. You don't need the room to agree with you before you begin. Begin anyway. The rest has a way of following.